Welcome, everyone. Welcome to this EBRA interview. EBRA is, as you know, the name of a project called European Brain Research Area. It is a project funded by the European Commission, and it's coming to an end this year. As part of the project, several clusters or working groups were put together with several experts from different disciplines, deep diving into specific topics. And today we're going to be talking about the cluster that focused on epilepsy research and how to shape epilepsy research in the future. My name is Frans Nivelle. I'm the Chief Communications Officer of eBrains. eBrains is a research infrastructure focused on brain research, created and built by the Human Brain Project teams. And as such, we are part of the EBRA consortium. And to discuss this very important topic of epilepsy, I'm very happy to be talking today with Professor David Henschel, who among his other many responsibilities is a professor of molecular physiology and neuroscience at the Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland. So David, welcome.
Thank you, Frans. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. I'm delighted to chat to you.
Well, thank you. Very great to have you with us, David, because epilepsy is an extremely important topic. Now, but before we go into the research priorities, can you tell us a little bit more about the cluster, what the purpose of the cluster was at the beginning?
Sure. The main purpose was to bring together all of the main actors interested and involved in European epilepsy research to agree really on shared priorities in the field moving forward, to speak, I think, with one voice to show that the community has collective goals and objectives, and by bringing us together, we can achieve more than we can do individually. And really to work together to remove any barriers that we see that will allow us to accelerate progress in the field.
Okay, so several disciplines were brought together, or was it mainly clinicians? Did you have scientists, patients in the group?
We had all of those things. The group was founded really with a mixture of basic and clinical science, and epilepsy as a field has always worked in this way, integrating basic science, translational science, and clinical science. But EPICLUSTER also introduced and brought together, or brought closer together, some of the other important stakeholders in epilepsy research. So this included patient organizations and patient representatives, and also the voice of industry, which is absolutely critical to accelerating and translating therapies and other technologies for our patients.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so very multidisciplinary then.
Yes, and actually there were scientists and disciplines outside of the traditional neuroscience area that were involved in many of the projects that were represented in EPICLUSTER.
Okay, yeah, so a very rich, a group of very rich expertise. That's very interesting. Now, David, just to deep dive a little bit about what the priorities, what priorities emerge from the discussions. Maybe something about the current situation of epilepsy care. It is well known by the community that about 30% of the epilepsy patients cannot be seizure-free still today. And what's the status of treatment today, and what is actually needed for the future?
Yeah, so as you say, there remains and continues to be around 30% of patients who don't respond to our current best anti-seizure medicines. And this is one of the key priorities for epilepsy research going forward. We have to be able to tackle the causes of drug resistance, to find medicines which overcome this, and move towards what we would call disease-modifying treatments. Most of the treatments, at least the pharmacological, the drug-based treatments that we have, reduce the occurrence of seizures, they reduce the symptoms of the disease, but actually they're really not changing the underlying altered biology within the brain. They stop the seizures occurring, but if you take away the medicine, then the seizures usually reoccur. So as a field, and this is one of the research priorities we discussed a lot in EPICLUSTER, we need to move towards disease-modifying therapies. And for us to do that, we need to understand the causes of the various forms of epilepsy. And really, epilepsy is often referred to now as the epilepsies, because it isn't a single disease. It is, in some ways, it is a group of diseases and many sort of small diseases or even rare forms, which all share epilepsy and seizures as a common problem. So we are trying to move towards disease-modifying therapies, and this includes things like gene therapy and cell therapy, so very advanced approaches that will be needed in order to permanently change the brain. But in addition to pharmacological approaches such as gene therapy, we also have surgery, which can be very effective at preventing seizures and even can be a cure in some cases. And we continue to learn ways in which surgery can be more effective than in the past.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So if I understand correctly, what you're also trying to do is in a sense try to stratify patient populations in order to better target potential treatments. And how would you go about this? What kind of research is needed to be able to stratify the patient groups towards specific epilepsies, as you mentioned?
So genetics is our best tool at this time. We know that there are variations in genes, there are mutations in genes which give rise to the epilepsies. These are often in some of the elements of how the brain functions that are important for controlling the excitability of the brain. And these can give rise to specific epilepsy syndromes. So our best approach to stratification is to identify where there is a mutation that is causing a particular type of epilepsy, and then identify as many patients with that same or similar mutation as possible, and then design a treatment. And it could be a gene therapy, or it may be a small drug-like molecule that will best correct either the gene defect or somehow otherwise stabilize the excitability within the brain. So genetics is really transforming this, and one of the projects that was linked in our EPICLUSTER is bringing together a very large group of European epilepsy specialist hospitals, so that they can pool together their expertise and develop cohorts of patients with specific types of epilepsy which could respond to a gene therapy.
Okay, very, very interesting. So I understand then that in order to do this, you need quite a lot of data in order to extract, the singularities of some patients. How do you deal with the data management in the epilepsy community?
Yeah, this is a large challenge, also a large opportunity. And as mentioned, one of the key partners in the EPICLUSTER group is a European reference network called EPICARE, which is, as mentioned, brings together really all of the expertise around Europe in the field of these rare epilepsies that are perhaps the most likely to respond to gene therapies, and also in some ways where the the burden on the patient and the family is the greatest. Some of these are really catastrophic childhood epilepsies for which we urgently need better treatment. So those networks create data sharing platforms so that they can develop registers of these patients. They can share information, diagnostic information, genomic information, and can share treatment approaches and treatment guidelines. The wider issue of data sharing is something that we as a cluster recognized early on as something that we could work towards improving. So all of the projects that came together in EPICLUSTER have large sets of both preclinical data sets as well as clinical data sets. But at the time that those projects finished and EPICLUSTER formed, there wasn't a mechanism for sharing data. And of course, there are good reasons for being very careful with data sharing, of course, patient confidentiality being the most obvious. But in order for research to move forwards, we have to have ways that we can share and exchange data in a safe way that protects patient confidentiality, but without creating too onerous barriers on research. And I think finding that balance has been very challenging. European data restrictions such as and legislation such as GDPR have created major barriers to data sharing, particularly genetic information. And this can be restrictive on health research. So we're discussing ways to deal with these challenges, and they're not yet all solved. And they certainly require infrastructures and investment and support.
Okay. Yes, and hopefully, the initiative that Europe has launched in the European health data space, as they call it. Hopefully, this will also help, data sharing move forward, and safe and compliant data sharing move forward. So hopefully, this will also allow, researchers to be able to leverage the full value of data.
Yes,
now, one thing you mentioned, sorry.
And I was going to say that infrastructures such as eBrains itself are so strongly aligned with what we aim to do as a community. And one of the members of the EPICLUSTER leadership group, Philippe Riveland, has been heavily involved in the Human Brain Project and eBrains. And it's this type of infrastructure that, in the case of eBrains, allows the sharing of recordings of brain activity as well as brain images that can be a real transformative effect in epilepsy research.
Yes, thank you. And yes, that's what that's our purpose. Now, you mentioned a little bit earlier the fact that your cluster brought together basic or fundamental researchers and clinicians. How have you managed to bridge actually these two worlds that are sometimes a little bit separate in science?
Yes, it's a good question. I think EPICLUSTER, one of its key achievements is bringing together clinicians and basic scientists around the same table so that they can learn from each other and work together. I think as a community, the epilepsy researchers understand that progress is absolutely tied between both groups. So we cannot make progress without important basic science to underpin our understanding of these diseases, but we also are absolutely dependent on our clinical colleagues in order to provide us with the best directions towards how to treat, what the treatment gaps are, and also by providing access to human data. In the case of the epilepsy field, this can include human brain samples, which are an absolutely phenomenal way to truly understand if what we're discovering in the laboratory really has relevance to what happens in the human brain. And epilepsy is relatively unique among brain diseases in that there are regular operations on the human brain in patients with treatment-resistant epilepsy, where a piece of brain tissue can be removed. And that by donating those samples to research teams, we've been able to discover far more than would be possible otherwise about what's different in the human brain in somebody who has epilepsy. And we're also even able now to develop technologies where we can, or apply technologies where we can keep some of that brain tissue alive so that we can make electrical recordings from living human brain tissue. And these are extraordinary new avenues that will offer us truly translational research opportunities in the future.
Wow, this is impressive. This is very interesting. Now, David, you also mentioned that industry was part of your working group. What do they bring, you know, to the discussion? How can they work together with you and with researchers?
Yeah, I think there's been a very productive relationship between researchers, both basic and clinical, and industry in the epilepsy field, and we have many things to sort of celebrate in terms of successes. I mean, we have more than 20 different medicines that are effective in many patients to treat and to prevent seizures. So as a field, I think we've worked very well together and productively with industry, and we want to continue that relationship. And this is why including them in the discussion is so important, because we as basic researchers and as clinicians know that we need to move towards disease-modifying therapies, towards gene therapies and precision therapy. And we need industry to be on board with that. And what we've seen in the last few years is that this is exactly what's happening. We both share the same goal and direction in mind. And we, as researchers, cannot bring medicines to the market without without pharma, without biotechnology companies. And likewise, they depend on us to provide the best models, to test, to screen potential treatments, and to bring them towards potential clinical trials. So it's absolutely a relationship that is solid and important.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. And another major stakeholder in the research area regarding epilepsy is, of course, the patient community. How involved were they in the cluster, and are they in general in shaping the future of epilepsy research?
Yeah, this is a great question. And again, this was one of the first things that we talked about before forming EPICLUSTER, was to think how to get the patient voice into the room so that it wasn't simply a discussion between scientists, clinicians, but that we embed the patient priorities and involvement of patients in research going forward. We need to change how we think about research in the field. And so what we did as EPICLUSTER was forming was had conversations in particular with the main international organization that represents patients. That's the International Bureau for Epilepsy, the IBE. And they were immediately on board with joining the group and have been sitting in on all of the meetings and all of the discussions from the very beginning. And in fact, 2 of our activities that we've run as EPICLUSTER have been focused on public patient involvement in research. This is something which is at a relatively early stage in the epilepsy field. We've seen other brain disease areas a little bit ahead of us in this area. So we wanted to focus on this during the past 2 years in EPICLUSTER to, in particular, initially raise awareness and understanding of what it really means to involve patients in your research, to get away from the idea that patient involvement is simply donating data or donating samples, but actually bringing patients into your research group to inform and guide the questions that you have, the design of your research, and the evaluation of your findings. And we think that this will begin to advance and accelerate both treatment and diagnostic approaches in the field into the future. So we've held 2 events. The first one sort of gave people an understanding of what public patient involvement in research was, with some examples of best practice in the field. And then more recently, we focused a workshop on how to start PPI, or public patient involvement, in your research if you are an epilepsy researcher, in particular for basic researchers to really understand what is needed, what is possible, how to get started.
Okay, so patient engagement from very early on in the research process. Okay, well, very interesting. Thank you very much. Now, David, all the findings and conclusions of the EPICLUSTER, can people access that? I mean, is there going to be a report, a paper that the community can get access to?
Yes, absolutely. So we've just finished our final activity last week in Brussels, and we're going to be writing up a report on that meeting, in particular, which will focus on the research priorities with a view from both the basic science, the clinical side, and also the patient and industry perspectives. And so that report will be made publicly and freely available for anyone to access. We also have some previous reports which are either available publicly or through the EBRA group and website.
Okay, well, very, very, very good. Thank you very much. David, if you had one final, take-home message that you would like to share with us today, I mean, what would it be? Like, the thing that you really want us to remember.
I think the thing we're most proud of is that we've been able to bring together and hold together the entire spectrum of the research community, that we've been able to not only bring together all of the key stakeholders, and we've talked about scientists, clinicians, scientists from other disciplines, the patient voice and the industry voice. Not only have we brought them together, but it's actually worked, that everybody who's come together has agreed that this is the right way. This is what we need to do as a community, and it will benefit patients and have a greater impact in the long run to continue to cooperate together, to share expertise, to share best practice. And I think I'm delighted that EPICLUSTER has played a small role in this, and I hope going into the future that the cooperation, the collaboration between these various groups will continue.
Yes. And can I ask you just a final question? And I'm sorry if this is not an easy question to answer, but do you think that one day we'll, reach the Holy Grail and we'll find a cure to epilepsy, or is it like science fiction?
No, I don't believe it's science fiction. I believe we will cure some, and I am hopeful many of the epilepsies. There will always be some which are perhaps not possible to cure in that sense, but that we could have transformational changes, reductions in seizures that make life so much better. And also, I think we're going to see treatments in the future that not only work on seizures, which is, of course, is a major disabling aspect of living with epilepsy, but there are other aspects as well, what we call comorbidities. These are aspects of mental health and wellness that can be severely impacted by having a chronic brain disease. And I think treatments in the future will also work to improve these elements of living with the disease. But I'm very confident that we will have cures for some and hopefully many of the epilepsies in the future.
Well, thank you very much, David. Thank you. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Franz. My pleasure.
And thank you, everybody, for watching this video. You can find the references to the papers that David mentioned on the EBRA website. And I invite you to share this video with the epilepsy community in order to continue to exchange thoughts and findings to make things move forward. Thank you very much, and see you soon.